Trish, thanks for taking the time to share what's a deeply personal journey with us for this particular series. I think it's going to contribute a lot.
Thank you.
So let's start back with what got you started on your journey, looking at psychedelics and what kind of solutions you were trying to get from it. What got you into it in the first place?
Sure. So I began my journey with psychedelics about 4 years ago. And what started beginning for me was having post-traumatic flashbacks of childhood abuse. And at that time, I thought I was going crazy. I didn't understand what was happening neurologically. I didn't understand the dreams. I didn't understand what was coming back. And at that time, it landed me on the floor in my bedroom, praying to God, spirit, universe, whatever was out there. Am I going crazy? Or can you show me a path forward to healing? It was through that it came through to me, kind of through meditation and prayer, to go forward and seek a path of healing with psychedelics.
Did you, at the time, think to seek traditional or conventional psychotherapy or psychiatric services with what was coming up, or did you just automatically look for a different path?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had been pursuing traditional psychotherapy for 20 plus years, and I felt like I had really exhausted that path. This, of course, was new, having post-traumatic flashbacks enter into the equation. And so for me, I feel like it was such an extreme act on me neurologically that I had to find something different, something new. For those that have ever experienced post-traumatic flashbacks, it can almost mimic like you're going crazy or that you're having some form of mental illness or dysfunction or something. And so for me, I think at that time, it was this plea for help in a new way. And this was just what came forward for me to explore.
What was the prior 20 years of therapy like that you were going through? Was it also for childhood abuse, or why were you seeking therapy?
Absolutely. So when I was 16, I became pregnant. And at the time, I had gone to have an abortion. And my parents showed up at the abortion clinic and put me on a plane and shipped me off to an all-girls private school. And I had my son for 9 months. And when he was 9 months old, my parents asked that I go see the bishop of the church. And at that time, the bishop had expressed to me that my son was not meant to be with me on this earth. And they ended up actually taking my son at 9 months old and adopting him out. Wow. So for me, I had memories of that and going through that experience that I sought traditional therapy. So much of what had happened by way of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, I had disassociated from. And my memories of that really didn't surface until my late 30s. And so I didn't have a lot of material when I was in traditional therapy other than working on, relationship issues that you're in, everyday life, stressors or circumstances. But I didn't do the deep dive into my healing journey until finding the path of psychedelics.
So would you characterize the 20 years of therapy as helpful, or was it just kind of helping you just keep your nostrils above the water? I mean, how would you describe that experience before you got to psychedelics?
Sure. I think that talk therapy serves a place. I think that traditional talk therapy for me was an outlet to give voice to everyday stressors that I was contending with. Although I don't find that one can really do the deep dive that they need to in a matter of an hour, or even have, the space to be able to go deeper into some of these traumatic events in such a short duration. So on one hand, I feel like therapy serves as a support mechanism, and I think it definitely gave me tools to navigate everyday life, but by way of really getting deeper into the subconscious was not available in traditional therapy.
Were you ever medicated? Did anybody ever recommend taking psychiatric medication along the way?
Sure. There was, there were a few times in my life where I started contending with depression, and I didn't understand really where that was coming from, why it was surfacing. I did try a couple times traditional pharmacology, but it didn't serve me neurologically. It just wasn't a fit for me. I had tried a couple times off and on. I'm someone who doesn't like the experience of kind of being out of my mind or my body in that way. And for me, it always gave me a feeling of being medicated, for lack of a better word.
So, after all this experience, what got you pointed towards psychedelics?
So my dive into psychedelics, much like my personality, is to really kind of go all in.
Yeah.
And my first introduction was to Iboga, and I had done some research on the best way to treat PTSD, and for me, Iboga was what appeared. Iboga is one of the most powerful hallucinogens, and for me, I believe that I had so many walls that were constructed around me, and I disassociated so deeply from my childhood trauma that it took something for me personally of that nature, of that power, of that caliber, to be able to kind of break down those constructs to get to what was really the undercurrent of what had happened in my childhood.
So with Iboga, so you went into that. What was it like? What was the outcome? Iboga is known to be a fairly tough experience.
Yeah. Iboga is definitely not for the faint of heart. I will say that. So for me, my experience with Iboga, I traveled to Costa Rica and did it there with a group. Iboga is very unique in that it's kind of watching your life unfold before your eyes. And so for me, my journey with Iboga began when I was coming out of the birthing canal of my mom. And all of a sudden, my life was on a big screen and watching from the day that I was born until present day and reliving everything that had happened. I grew up in a Mormon family, baby of 9 children, and from the outside looked like this perfect family. And yet I had not gone and revisited the severe physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse that was going on in my household. A few months prior to doing Iboga, I had tragically lost my sister to drug overdose. And I think that this also brought forth the opportunity to explore her addiction, how this was showing up in my family system, and to really go back and do some healing work around it.
So you went through that experience, so it had to be pretty intense to watch that, I guess, to relive it,
Yeah.
viewing it kind of on a screen.
Yeah.
And once you got through that, when you came out of that journey, what was the response or the experience for you?
I think after this first experience, I think what was difficult for me is life as I knew it had all of a sudden completely and dramatically changed. I was conditioned to live a perception of what we as a family were like from the outside and the appearances, and now to have all of that kind of crumble down, it was hard for me to come back into my family system, my friend systems. My parents are both living. I had had up until that point a relatively close relationship with my parents. And now having to integrate this aspect of going through such extreme physical and sexual abuse in my childhood, those relationships dramatically shifted for me. And I believe that psychedelics kind of it's the gateway into exploring this. I think that it gives us the opportunity to kind of take a peek inside, and then coming home is really when the work begins.
Yeah.
And the years preceding my first psychedelic experience, now today I've had over 200 psychedelic experiences, but that was the beginning of the journey and the path forward to healing for me. And I think one of the most powerful things about psychedelics is with Iboga, one journey allowed me to look at my entire life up until that point. That's something that traditional therapy could have never provided, or that I could have unlocked on my own, I think, in a traditional setting. And so the path forward once I got home really was one that took that's when the courage and the work really began.
Wow. So with 200 experiences now, I imagine Iboga is not the
Yeah.
only plant medicine that you've done.
No.
So from there and after that experience, which is kind of starting at the deep end of the pool, if you
Sure.
will, with Iboga, where did you go to next? What was your next experience?
My next experience was with 5-MeO DMT, and that for me, still to this day, I don't know, that could be one of my favored of them all, and I've tried them all now. You know, the experience of this ego, dissolving one's ego, and to get all of the walls and all of the things that we put in place, right, to hold it together. For me, I think that not having those memories up until that point really served its purpose. And going through this brave journey with psychedelics, especially with 5-MeO, that's one still to this day I still get nervous before doing, because I know it's going to be this complete ego death of letting it all go and not being able to hold on so tight to the things that kind of keep us in order and keep us together.
So maybe give it a little bit more of the color around 5-MeO. So you said it was one of the more, I think you said, pleasant experiences of some that you've gone through. So what was it like?
I don't know that pleasant is the word that I would use for any of these. So when I started on my path with psychedelics, all of my journeys have been assisted with a shaman. And with 5-MeO, I was introduced to an amazing and beautiful shaman that kind of guided my process. 5-MeO of all of the psychedelics is shorter in its experience with it. And so you begin in smoking it and then lay back. And for me, 5-MeO allows me to take a look at these aspects of my life, or even for me with a lot of my trauma and PTSD, I was having so many symptoms that just I couldn't put my finger on why they were showing up or what was coming forth for that. And so with 5-MeO, you essentially, it's, you know, completely out of the mind, out of the body, and you allow, as I would call it, spirit or God to come in and show you elements of your life that need healing. And the experience lasts maybe 30 minutes, and then, you know, one of the beautiful things about that ceremony is that you can kind of come back to and carry on with life, unlike some of the others like Iboga that goes on for a couple days.
Yeah. So you had that 5-MeO experience. Did you feel like any aspect of you healed then, or did you really need time to figure out how to process it and have it impact you in a healing way?
I think, you know, from my personal experience with my trauma, when you can bring awareness to what you're trying to heal, it's a game changer. And so I think for me to see my insecurities in life, my fears in relationships, my intimacy issues, to see that and to bring it into the awareness, there's an element of psychedelics that instantly, just by bringing it into our awareness, healing begins on that level. I think that it's continued on a deeper path of then diving into that and really dissecting how that shows up in different ways. You know, for me in my childhood, having a relationship with my father that was abusive, showing up in relationships always proved challenging. And yet I didn't have that context because I didn't have the memories until really doing the work with psychedelics. So bringing that forward and being able to actually see that playing out, seeing the dynamic of what happened in that time in my childhood, then the healing really began, because I could see it in real time of how I was participating in the dysfunction, or how my fears were showing up in my relationships.
So would you say, I mean, when you hear, well, I've done 200 psychedelic experiences, is that an addiction? I mean, are these substances addictive? Why 200?
I don't know how someone could get addicted to psychedelics. It poses a good question, right? Many have said that, and many have questioned even the amount that I have used and how many journeys that I've done. You know, my childhood was on the extreme end. And so I think much like therapy, if you can look at someone going to therapy over the course of their lifetime, you know, many times, although I have heard stories of people doing one psychedelic experience and that really was all that they needed to overcome addiction or trauma or whatever it might be for them, for me, it's been a deeper experience of really healing and going through the work. I think that I've also been so dedicated to healing on such a deep level that the work and the opportunity is always there for more. Personally, psychedelics are always met with an equal kind of anxiety and anticipation because the work isn't easy. I would say it's probably the most courageous therapeutic process anyone could go through. So to do that kind of half-heartedly, or even the recreational use of psychedelics, for me, it's never really that fun party, go down that road. Right. It's like, hold on for dear life, because, you know, the layers. And I believe, too, that we can only, with trauma, what is revealed to us has to come in gradual steps. For me, I can't imagine if I relived every element of what happened to me all at once. I don't think that I could have. I think I would have been on the verge of a mental breakdown to be able. And so I believe that neurologically it's revealed piece by piece for us to be able to process it and assimilate it at our own pace, you know, slowly peeling back those layers.
Do you feel like in the time that you've been doing psychedelics that you've had a measurable or profound shift in your own spirituality, your kind of view of reality and you know, God and other such things?
I am a different person. I believe wholeheartedly that psychedelics saved my life. I believe that had I not found the path forward with psychedelics, I would be dead. And I believe that to be true because the level of abuse and what I had to look at for me, to me, at one point, suicide was the only way out. I didn't know how to be with what had happened to me in my childhood. And so I believe that now I'm a completely different person. To say 5 years ago that I would have lived a life that was thriving, full of joy and happiness and having a deep connection to source, I didn't imagine that this was possible without psychedelics. And yet it is possible without the use of drugs or pharmaceuticals or other, you know, things that are so mainstream in our model for mental health. And so to be able to have healed in such a deep and profound way, it's incredible.
Yeah, I think childhood physical abuse and sexual abuse is probably more common than we know, and certainly people who have experienced it either have blocked it out or it's not something that you really, you know, go to parties and talk about. But yet they harbor this. But since you have been openly talking about this, I imagine you've encountered other people with similar childhood trauma, and have you led them to psychedelics as a potential path for them to heal? And if so, what were their outcomes?
Yeah, you know, when I started healing my history and trauma, it was so clear to me that my path forward was to help others on their healing journeys as well. And to know that healing is available to everyone. I went with 2 of my siblings last year to Peru to do ayahuasca. And they really tethered to me to show them the path forward and to know that healing is available. And I think that not only with some of my peers, and many of my peers I've directed down this path, but also with my family and the family system of being able to heal intergenerationally and to be able to spread this through lineages of changing abusive patterns. I have many friends that have started on their path of psychedelics through me and through my experience, watching the changes that have transpired with me personally. And I think one of the things that I always say is that healing is available to everyone, and it really is that accessible. And I love that now psychedelics are becoming more mainstream. We don't have the taboo about it. We can have different conversations around psychedelic use and the powers and healing properties that each one of them individually brings.
I'm very sorry for the loss of your sister. Do you feel like if she were introduced to psychedelics that maybe it could have saved her life?
I've often thought and had to sit with how different her life would have been if she could have found this path. I reflect often, even recently I had a psychedelic journey where I was able to have a dialogue with her, and how deeply I wished she could have had this path of healing. You know, in my life, my go-to was perfectionism, and for her, it was addiction. Neither one was better. It was our own ways of coping with what had happened to us, and I believe that her life would have been dramatically different. And, you know, she struggled so deeply, and her only support was to kind of tether to the abusive cycles that, you know, were from our childhood by depending on my parents for help through her sobriety or healing path. And I believe that she would be alive today had this been available then.
This is interesting in the sense that you're able to go into a psychedelic journey and literally have a communication, the experience at least of a communication with your sister.
Yeah.
Was that healing for you to be able to do that?
So when I did my Iboga experience, my sister had died August 14th. And on September 14th, I went to go do my first Iboga experience. And I had shared with some casually in the group that I had just lost my sister. And when my Iboga journey began, I was maybe an hour or two into it, and I wasn't expecting this, but the shaman came over to me and whispered in my ear, and he said, "Would you like to go see your sister?" And I kind of, puzzled, thought, and I didn't really realize that was on the menu of options, but of course I was game at this point. So he took me through a visualization, took me up into a different part of the spirit world, and he asked me to call her forward. And as I called her name, she came in, and I could see her, I could smell her, I could touch her, I could feel her. And she and I sat for 3 hours and shared about her death, shared about our childhood, shared about things that needed to be said. Had I not had that experience with her, I don't know that I would be the person that I am today, because the healing that came through and us being able to have that level of communication in the spirit world was like nothing I've ever experienced. It seems strange to say, but in a lot of ways I feel closer to her on the other side now than I did even in this lifetime, because she was so riled in her addiction when she was alive. Now to have this access to her in the spirit world is something beyond my wildest dreams, and I know it and I see it, and the signs are there, and she's so perfectly attuned to this life. I think that it's allowed such deep healing.
So I'm interpreting, based on the way you're describing that you're not, your perspective isn't that this was just something that happened in your imagination, but it was a real and direct experience with your sister.
Absolutely, yeah. This to me was not in my imagination. The week prior to going to do Iboga, I was working with a spiritual teacher, and she was telling me at that time, your sister will come to you by way of rainbows and you'll know it. And the night that I went to go see my sister in the spirit realm, I had someone take a picture of my house, and there was this pink aura and rainbows all over my home for 24 hours. Wow. And I don't know, how do you explain that? How do you make sense of that? And I know for so many it seems ethereal or woo-woo, but there's too many things that have been grounded in these experiences. There's too many things that I can feel deep within my soul and my heart. There were things that my sister and I were able to share and communicate on such a deep level that there's no way that it wasn't her that we had those dialogues together.
It's really fascinating. So other types of psychedelics that you've done, have you done like psilocybin? Mm-hmm. What was that like for you?
I have done psilocybin. Psilocybin, for me, I tend to, in my journeys, kind of play a little bit bigger than maybe some. And so I'm a big fan of psilocybin and kind of doing a hero dose. The biggest dose I've ever done is about 5 grams of psilocybin. And for me, with that experience, it was having almost direct downloads from spirit of sharing with me about what my life path was and what my purpose was and how I could align with that moving forward. I think so often in life, our egos or our limiting beliefs, there's so much for me of, if we let ego get in the way and, I can't accomplish this or do this, or how do I come into alignment? Psilocybin has provided the most direct answers for me with spirit of what I'm meant to be doing and what my path is forward. I have also experienced kind of sacred geometry with psilocybin, not all the time, but when it does come up.
Describe that experience when you say I experienced sacred geometry. What do you mean by that?
So with psilocybin, it kind of opens this portal of being able to see geometry in the way everything is constructed, all of, the atoms and molecules and all of that, and being able to see geometric shapes and kind of how everything has a connection. It's just, remarkable, but literally seeing in your mind's eye, in my opinion, sacred geometry and how everything was kind of formed in this universe, and to see our collective connectedness and consciousness.
And so when you witness that in a journey, what's the feeling you have as you're observing this? Like, what is, are you just kind of impassionate and saying, oh, that's kind of interesting? Or is it like this feeling that you have, of awe? Or what is it that you experience?
Sure. I think that, coming from a background of trauma, I was so disassociated from emotion at all. I lived my life numb for years. And it wasn't until I found psychedelics that all of a sudden I could actually feel emotion. I could feel love. I could feel joy. I could feel sorrow. I could feel pain, all of that. And it was as if my body all of a sudden came online. So when seeing something like sacred geometry or something like that and seeing the connectedness, I think that so often, for me anyway, I was in this dark void of having no connection really to anyone or self for that matter. And so to be able to all of a sudden allow your body to come online and not be alone, not be separate, not be disconnected, and be a part of a universal force and feeling and connection with all things, I think is one of the most magical awes of the psychedelic realm, of feeling that connectedness.
Yeah, I have to imagine that going from childhood trauma and almost feeling disconnected and feeling I can't try to pretend to understand what the feelings would be, but that there's a brokenness, I guess, and that when you suddenly are in the presence of sort of this, I'm a part of everything and everything's a part of me, is that in and of itself kind of giving you an understanding that I'm not maybe broken, even though maybe these things happen to me? Or how is it healing, I guess, is what I'm trying to figure out.
Absolutely. I think for me, I almost prided myself on the fact that I hadn't cried in 39 years, and to be that numb. And so to all of a sudden have a life force ignited within you was like, this is what living is about. This is what we're made to be about. This is also something that is what brings the joy. And I think one of the things that I've extracted from my work in psychedelics is that all of us are here on this earth living out our spiritual curriculum, as I like to call it. And the feeling of brokenness is all, that was part of mine to go through, to heal. It was part of my journey. And I believe that healing really comes through taking the deep dive into the bowels of our soul, as I say, and how psychedelics allow you to kind of feel and process and integrate these aspects of ourself.
So, the psilocybin experience, again, sounds pretty fascinating. Other things, MDMA, have you had experience with that?
I have. MDMA. I might have to go back and say that MDMA is my favorite versus 5-MeO, but it's a toss-up. MDMA is such a remarkable opportunity for healing. As they say with MDMA, it's the heart opener. Although, so many people on psychedelics have these mystical experiences with God, and it's all beauty and oneness and light and love. Mine, as we kind of laugh around my peer group in the psychedelic community, is I'm kind of a gutter girl. I go down, I start digging for the deep gold and riches in that. But MDMA, one of the things that I like about it is that you, not always, but in many of my journeys personally, I speak a lot, and it's, I'm audible throughout it. And so I have a transcription that I can go back and really extract elements that are hidden in aspects of myself. And MDMA allows for this deep introspection, and also just looking at elements that I think I have had a history of a lot of self-deception. It's not something that I really look at, and MDMA allows in such a gentle, graceful way to kind of just gently peel back the curtains and take a peek inside. And it does it in such a loving container. One of the things that I like about MDMA as well is that it isn't as difficult on the body. By way of example, Iboga, I may be purged for 5 hours straight. Right. It's pretty brutal. Same with ayahuasca, there's purging involved. And with MDMA, you don't really have the physical purging. So the experience just generally is so much lighter and a bit more graceful.
Well, you brought up ayahuasca.
So here we go.
So let's talk about that. And incidentally, as we're getting into this, I'm sorry that we're just kind of like rapid fire going through all these, because it's fascinating. But and one might kind of view this and say, oh my goodness, it seems like this person's out doing all these different drugs. But it's really not like you're not going out getting high. I mean, you're like you said, hey, you're doing some deep work,
right.
With all these they're not drugs, but really tools. I think in this respect, and so it's interesting that you really look at all of them and say, oh, okay, this one kind of takes me to this place. This one takes me to this particular place. They seem to all serve a purpose. Is that
right?
And a different purpose.
Absolutely. I think that for me, my personality by nature is to want to explore and try on things and see what works. And I think also, as I shared with you earlier, when I got into psychedelics, it was either I was going to die or I was going to heal. And my choice was to heal. And so within that, it was a matter of tasting these different flavors for healing. And so each medicine provides a different opportunity and lens to explore in healing, and each one brings a different essence and brings a different feeling and goes to different places in healing. I think for me, when I began with Iboga, I had to go and look and literally go down to the depths to have it all brought to the surface. And then from there, I've been able to choose different modalities like 5-MeO or ayahuasca, psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine, to explore the intricacies of healing beneath that. I think oftentimes in our personalities or our character, we don't see really the nuances that are needing our attention. And so I've had the opportunity to kind of, as one might say, peek under the hood and kind of make adjustments along the way.
Does it seem like these different medicines, these different psychedelics have different personalities in a sense? Because when I hear people talk about it, sometimes they almost give them like a personality as compared to, more of a, here's their biochemical, makeup. It's like, this is kind of a masculine, kind of brute force. This is a little bit more feminine. This one kind of is more playful. Like I hear personalities. Is that kind of your experience with different psychedelics?
Absolutely. They each bring their own unique taste. As they say, ayahuasca or the grandmother is very nurturing, very loving. That's not to say that one's journey isn't brutal, quite frankly.
Have you had a brutal journey on ayahuasca?
I have had a very, I was left for dead on ayahuasca, for sure.
Whoa.
I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm dead.
Was that your first ayahuasca journey or no?
That one actually was my first ayahuasca journey.
No, when you say you were left for dead, what does that mean exactly?
Well, I think for me, what happened is that I have this nature to want more in life, more, there's always striving for more, always being more. And that was really a byproduct of a feeling from my childhood of not being enough. And so with my first ayahuasca experience, I went up and did my first dose. And then the shaman invited us to come back for those that wanted it to do a second dose. And I, with my personality, thought, this is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in and, I'm going to either go big or go home, right, as they say. And I think one of the unique things with these medicines is that the medicine gives you what you need in the moment. And even if you try to outrun it or manipulate it or think that you can have control over it, we always are given the lessons that we need. And for me, it was like, you really shouldn't have taken more because now look what's going to happen. And for me, that experience was, they had to take me out of the Maloka, which is like the temple in which you do ceremony, into my own private room, where it was about 6 hours of screaming at the top of my lungs. It was a pretty extreme, but the lesson that I extracted from that and the learning that I needed from that is that life can be gentle. It's not always, our body is a temple. Our body, if we can feed it in such a loving, gentle, graceful way, and it isn't always about overconsumption of anything, and so Aya really allowed me to go through that process and journey.
Did you ever do a second one?
Second journey?
Yeah.
I've done several of ayahuasca now, yeah.
So this is what's really fascinating. So you have this kind of brutal experience, as you described it, in the first journey, and you went back.
I did go back because I think that, I'm on a path of self-improvement. I'm on a path of, wanting to be the best person that I can be. I'm also on a path of deep and spiritual healing. And I know that it may seem on a lot of levels that, perhaps this is, psychedelics can be addictive. Yet I think that if we look at our lifetimes and all of the things that are available for us for healing, would that be over in just one journey? For me, undoubtedly, it wasn't.
So I have to imagine, though, that as maybe tough as the experience was on your first ayahuasca journey, that you got some great value out of it, which caused you to want to go back? Is that a safe assumption? Yeah.
Absolutely. Because even though that journey was difficult, it was an element of my personality that was holding me back. It was something that was keeping me hostage in my life. I think part of that wanting more or always striving for more takes us out of the present day, present moment, present breath. And so being able to see how much that desire within me was holding me back by being present in my life, and to see how, really how that manifested for me was being locked in a room, screaming and grasping for air and for help. Whereas if I could just take life a bit more gently, a bit more gracefully, being in the moment, being more connected to my breath, being more connected to nature and spirit and source, that I could have a more fulfilling, rewarding life. So when I could actually be with the gifts and the journey that came through that and the lessons, and I think that's such a big part of psychedelics as well. How do we integrate the things that we see and then move forward and use them in our daily lives?
So you went for subsequent ayahuasca journeys. So pick out maybe even the next one after that. And what was that experience like?
The next ayahuasca experience that I had was probably one of the more profound experiences. And that to me was going back to my childhood of being sexually abused for years. And it was something that I had deeply disassociated from. I didn't have memories of it until I went back through this experience, and then my memories really started coming back. And for me, I saw the way that, having been sexually abused as a child, I then in my adult life was attracted to sex addicts or, people that had drug addictions or narcissism or these different patterns, because there was this element of me that wasn't yet healed. There was this element of this little girl that hadn't been able to integrate what had happened to her. I had never had a sense of ownership over my body or my vessel. And to have at such a young age sexual abuse begin with someone, there's so many different ways that manifests, even in my early 20s, being promiscuous or not really caring what happened to my body, not treating it with the love and respect, but not really being able to identify where that was coming from. So reliving that with ayahuasca was heartbreaking, to go back and be with that little girl, to hold her and experience what she had gone through. But I think one of the incredible things that happens is that once you see that, in that journey, I was also able to go back and love her and soothe her and rescue her and integrate these splintered parts of myself that I didn't even know were divided at that point.
So a couple of things I find interesting with this is that, in traditional psychotherapy or psychiatric care, the drugs would be directed toward trying to just numb you or, to make you functional by numbing away, whatever the PTSD might bring, as compared to, in this approach, going in and actually revisiting and processing and all the things that you just described. It's really a very, very different world. There's one other thing that I find fascinating is that here we have the same person, the same agent, ayahuasca, and you do it one time and it's one experience. You do it another time, it's a completely different experience. In other words, any other traditional pharmaceutical, when you take it, it's pretty much the same action every single time. This seems to develop with you, over subsequent experiences. Is that accurate? Is that the way you see it?
It is. I think that we are allowed this gateway into exploring different aspects and different pieces of ourself. And so I've never had two experiences be the same with any of them, and that's across the board. I think one of the things that's so sad about pharmaceuticals is that it is an agent for numbing. And for me to be able to go back and relive some of these experiences, for as hard as that was, it also allowed the freedom, because once you can go and see it and process it, you can move through it and healing is available. You know, up until then in traditional psychology, I mean, one of the things that I found so interesting, there were clues along the way that I had abuse in my childhood. Yet in 20 years of traditional therapy, not one therapist teased out, do you think you were ever sexually abused? I had every symptom from the DSM, every symptom, and yet not one therapist of the many that I had seen even asked the question, ever had the courage to dive into it, ever, what is part of that broken system that it took something like this of finding psychedelics to actually be able to go in and do the deep healing work to extract this. And I think that's one of the flaws in traditional medicine.
Yeah. But I didn't realize that through the therapy you didn't even know at that point. You just knew that you weren't psychologically happy or healthy maybe, but I didn't realize you didn't know that you had, this childhood abuse. So that's kind of staggering. So to discover that is, that'd be quite an awakening, I'd imagine.
It is. It was. I think that for me in that journey to go back and relive what had happened to me sexually, all of a sudden you can go back and have compassion for that person that had been acting from that place. And so for me, that was something that was so remarkably healing to be able to go back and love on that 8-year-old, to love on the 15-year-old, to love on the 20-year-old that didn't have self-respect or self-love, to go back and love on the 30-year-old that was struggling to find connection and intimacy and love and healthy relationships. And to be able to go back and be with all those aspects and then integrate them into a new and meaningful way, I don't know how traditional therapy could ever get you there.
Well, you brought up another one I guess we have to talk about.
Okay, go for it.
Ketamine. So talk to me about your experience with ketamine.
Ketamine is powerful. For me, it's one of my, I don't want to say it's my least favorite because they all bring their own elements to it. It's just a little bit harder for me on the body. But ketamine is completely disassociative for me. I do know that I'm sitting in a chair, but as far as your mind is concerned, you're in a completely different realm at kind of the higher doses of ketamine. It's another aspect to peel back the layers of the subconscious of what's available. For me, ketamine's a little bit trickier by way of nausea afterwards. I find that my body kind of takes a little bit of a serotonin drop afterwards neurologically. There's been many gifts and insights that have come from ketamine. It's not my number one go-to because I find that the work with ketamine for me personally is a little bit harder. That isn't the case for everyone. I have many people that love ketamine and it does incredible, and even for me, I would say that ketamine really helped with depression in my life. I would say today, from someone who went from feeling suicidal, I've never had feelings like that in, the last couple of years that I found psychedelics. And I think ketamine was definitely one of those drugs that provided relief in that regard.
So something that occurs to me based on sort of your history, saying, okay, 20 years of psychotherapy, never really came out that you were sexually abused as a child and physically abused as a child. Now you go into the psychedelic realm and many would make the argument, hey, that's kind of an altered state of reality and consciousness. Could this be imagined or contrived in some way as compared to being actual? So have you ever, once you kind of got in there and said, oh my God, all this stuff happened to me, and did you ever go back to corroborate with people that might be able to corroborate the story that these things happen to you?
Yeah, I think that's an incredible question. I think it's something that's asked often and something that I come up against with those that I've introduced to psychedelics because there's so much that we need to interpret after our experiences or our journeys or ceremonies. I had come through to me in one of my ceremonies of being violently shaken as a baby by my father. And it was something that, for me to relive that as a baby. And at the time in my journey, I was maybe 6 months old, a period of time that we couldn't really tether, let's say, memories to, or, have kind of that recollection. And this was something that was so deeply disturbing to me. How do you sit with that? How do you sit with someone that you have a relationship with now? Mm-hmm. And so I went back to one of my brothers and said, I had these memories come through, or these visions come through, rather, of being violently shaken as a baby. And my brother recounted, I remember watching this happen to you. And I remember you were shaken so violently until you passed out and you were laid down in your crib. And he said, I went over and held your hand and prayed to God that you wouldn't die. And so I have gone back and had to do the healing work with these family members and other people that have been in my life to really be able to come to a place of forgiveness and peace. And I think that was a powerful part of my experience and healing. It was to actually go back and have these difficult conversations and to be able to go through the therapeutic process of coming to the other side of forgiveness.
What's remarkable is that, you can, in these altered states of consciousness, observe things that have happened to you. When you bring it back to varying people, family members, what have you, are they at first shocked that you now have become aware of all this and the methodology through which you became aware of it?
It's a good question, right? It's one that many ask. I grew up in a Mormon family, so obviously drugs, alcohol, anything like this is not something that, was in our home in any way. However, I think that when my memories did start coming back, and I believe, as I had shared before, psychedelics can be the gateway of kind of opening that or taking the lid off the bottle of these memories. And for me, what happened is after doing the psychedelic experience, the memories started slowly coming back in my conscious mind. And so I've had to go and have difficult conversations with my parents to confront some of the things that happened. My father's been very resistant to accepting or owning any of these aspects. My mother has taken a completely different approach, even so far as to say she wants to do journeys herself, to really bring herself to a place of healing. So I think that, just because we're doing the healing work, that we don't always invite others to come along that journey with us. And I think that we have to get to a place of peace within ourselves. And I have experienced deep healing with people that have been in my life through bringing up some of the things that have been revealed in ceremonies. And I think that, again, healing is available to all of us when we're ready and we have the courage to take that first step.
Well, if nothing else, it seems that the perspective is this is, for no pun intended, but this is a journey, not a destination. It's not like, hey, I just want to get to this point and I'm done, but literally you seem to be on this ongoing journey, which is really quite fascinating, and certainly it seems like you've gotten a lot of healing out of it thus far. So I appreciate you taking the time, to share your vast experience with us, and I think what you've communicated should help a lot of people.
Thank you so much. It is a journey, and I think that for me, it's a matter of surrendering to spirit of what's next and what's available for us by way of healing, and it's nothing but remarkable. And the journey continues.
It certainly does. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.